In 2024, the PLL is going to a home city system. It's either going to be a city, state, or region. I know that sounds exciting. Everyone wants them to come to their hometown, but I had to dig into the data. That's right, this is a deep dive into the data to figure out where are they really going to go. And I think I've got a pretty good idea. Now, I don't have the PLL's data. What they said they were going to do is they were going to take a look at their own data. Of course, they've got a lot of commerce data. How much did they sell, where, different places. Of course, venues, how well do they sell out when they're in these different places. All that information they have, I don't have. They gave us attendance numbers the first year. Since we haven't seen anything, at least not that I can find. They also said they were going to go into the MLL's data. That we've got a little more access to as far as attendance records. So I took a look at that. So I looked at attendance, I looked at locations, which look the PLL has gone, and other prominent leagues. We'll see that in a minute. I also looked into how many players are in a given area. I think it's important to know how many lacrosse players exist in that area. So I got some high school lacrosse data. I looked at some economic information because it's important to know how much money do people spend or can they spend on something like lacrosse. And at the end, I took a look at this crazy awesome report that I found talking about where are most fans just obsessed with sports. All of that coming to you now, but first and foremost, let's take a look at just really briefly the announcement. So if you've already seen the announcement, you can skip ahead. This video is going to be kind of long, but let's just take a look at the announcement first. So first and foremost, here is what they showed us. The home cities announcement back on May 25th. Basically what you see here is Paul Rabel said they are moving the 8 teams into the home cities, and this will be the biggest investment in the league since its inception. Now, let me jump back to 8 teams. He said 8 teams are happening. He did not say an expansion is happening. I heard on a Discord chat with Mike Rabel that the focus is on growing players' salaries, not expanding the league at this moment, okay? So we're probably going to see just those 8 teams. We're probably not going to see an expansion yet. So getting back to this look right here, Paul also mentioned this move will unlock a deeper, more connected relationship between our fans, teams, and players, continuing to build a global presence around lacrosse. Driving our mission forward will remain core to our approach. We're giving the PLL local love and global awareness. They also mentioned, I think it's really important to see in here, the plan is that they will continue to remain a touring model. They will continue to be a touring model, and the 8 teams will be playing in one city over a 2-day weekend beginning in 2024. The home team will play a double header in that venue. So when a team is now in their home market, they're going to be playing a double header, meaning they're going to play both Friday, Saturday, or both Saturday, Sunday to help build that relationship at the local city level. One more thing I want to point out here. The league schedule will continue with 14 game weekends, June to September. 8 of those 10 regular season games are going to be at the home venue. So that means we have 2 regular season weekends at a neutral site. Now, I will mention the neutral site for the very first game, if we continue with the pattern we've seen, is probably going to be Albany. It sounds like if you listen to the Rabels, they love Albany as the training camp location, and they love playing lacrosse there. They mentioned that they're going to continue to come back to Albany. I don't think Albany is a home team, because that's kind of weird to be everyone in the home team of one for training camp and then the first game. That just doesn't feel right. So I don't think Albany's going to actually be one of the home cities, but I think it's going to be here continuously moving forward. The other things I think that are important to mention with this is then you will have the All-Star game, the playoffs, and the championships will be held in locations to be determined. I read that as they're probably going to be neutral site locations. And this is really crushing to me because I don't know. There's one city I would love to have a team, but I just don't think they're going to have it. I think it's just going to remain a championship city. So that's the information. That's the background. If you hadn't heard what's going on, the basics around moving to home cities, that's what it is. Now it's time to get a little nerdy. Now we're going to get our deep dive into the data. I've created a what do you call this? A map. I created a Google Map so that we can see where all these teams have played, where I think the potential location for a PLL city will be. So first and foremost, I've already got it checked on the LXM Pro Tour. So I added all prominent lacrosse leagues on here. That's right, prominent lacrosse leagues. Let's start with LXM. If you're not familiar with it, it was in 2010 through 2014. They played 23 games all across the U.S. This was the original touring lacrosse model, brought to you by Kyle Harrison and crew. A few people were involved in that whole experience. They were trying to create a competitive league really to the MLL, something that was a little bit more traditional. So here you have where they went, where they were located. What's interesting about this is they were based on the West Coast. So I think they were based on the West Coast. That's just kind of the vibe that I always got. So here you can see obviously a high concentration in areas like California, Vegas, Phoenix, Utah. They went to Salt Lake City a few times in Utah, and of course they did get up to Seattle. Not a whole lot in the hotbed of the Northeast, but you do see some alternative places. That was kind of the cool thing about the LXM Tour, is they did try to grow the game. Looking at the map, they tried to grow the game. I'm not putting a lot of stock in this map, but you know what? I think it's kind of important to pay attention to. The first touring league, this is where they went. So, interesting data points there. Let's move on to the NCAA finals. Here we see where the NCAA finals have been located. Look, this is the gold standard for lacrosse weekends. The NCAA is the one event of the year where lacrosse fans all flock together for one weekend on one city, kind of like what the PLL is trying to do. So if I take a look, of course, Maryland has been the site of the PLL NCAA championships, the M&T Bank Stadium. Philly has hosted a bunch in the last 10 years. You've got Foxborough at Gillette Stadium has hosted a bunch. And then we randomly went to East Hartford in 21 and 22. What's unique about this map is you can go ahead and click on some of these icons. I'll make sure I share this map. And you can see I put in some attendance for the finals, for the championship game. So East Hartford, those are their attendance numbers. Philadelphia, those are their attendance numbers. I just kind of wanted to see what's the attendance look like in these areas. Again, just kind of weighing into my decision of which cities are kind of more important than maybe other cities in this list. That's the NCAA finals. Of course, it's pretty isolated. There haven't been a whole lot of places that have hosted. So let's pull the map out a bit. Now we're talking about the NLL, the National Lacrosse League, box lacrosse. I think it's important to remember where they are located and what does the fan base do? Do they go to these games? So shout out to Point Streak. This is the MLL attendance, but I was able to pull in a lot of data on attendance records. So you will see, if I zoom in here a little bit, something like Minnesota has 8299 behind it. That is the average attendance at a Minnesota Swarm game. Yes, the Minnesota Swarm are no longer there. They've moved to Georgia. However, when there was a team, an NLL team in Minnesota, boy, did they show up for that team. I think they're probably hungry for another team, right, Minnesota? If you're with me, let me know in the chat down below in the comments. Taking a look at this list, there are some places that stick out. I'm going to kind of do my little cheat sheet here. I don't know that you can actually see this, but this was the list of data that I put together. Here we can see which are some of the more popular destinations. Buffalo at 14,000, Saskatchewan at 12,000. We need to get some cooler names here in the US. Colorado at almost 13, Calgary at 11, Toronto at 9. So here's where I'm going to take a little time for my own little soapbox. I'm really sorry, Canada. I don't think the PLL is coming to you. They've had one time where the PLL tour went north of the border. The rest of the time, they've spent all of it in the States. I think NLL is going to be dominant in Canada. I don't think the PLL wants to compete there. So I think the PLL stays in the States with maybe, possibly a neutral site game up there. Who knows? We don't really know what's going to happen, but I'm sorry. I'm just crossing off all Canadian cities at this time. So getting back to our list, so things that stand out here: Buffalo, 14,000. They just won the championship. Colorado at 13. Minnesota supported their teams. Philly supported their teams. Halifax, Edmonton, I'm skipping over. Rochester, Georgia, Vegas. Maybe more important than some of the high numbers, or actually equally important, is some of the low numbers. Texas, you're at the bottom of the barrel, my friends. Long Island, Albany, Connecticut. All of those show up towards the bottom. Again, this is a data point. This is not like the be-all, end-all. This is how I'm making my decision. This is NLL box lacrosse data. We know on Lax Twitter, outdoor, indoor lacrosse, which one's real, which one's better. You're going to argue about it forever. just data points to see which areas support their teams. Let's move into the MLL, getting a little closer to the outdoor game, which, of course, the MLL merged with the PLL a few seasons ago, which gave us the Cannons from the MLL. But here are all the locations that existed in the MLL for the last 10 years. And again, you will see numbers beside them, like if we take a look at Chicago, 2313. That is the attendance, the average attendance at a Chicago game. Okay, so that's how we basically did this. You can see Denver, 10,040. That's 10,000 people on average going to those games. Denver, I think you've got yourself a very good chance at being one of these top teams this year, or being one of the locations in 2024. Again, here we see the whole matrix. I will pull up what I've shown. Weirdly, sometimes this just doesn't sort the way I want it to, but here we go. Denver, Boston, Chesapeake, you know, your Maryland, Washington, D.C. type area, the Chesapeake Bay area, 6,500. That's an important number to see. Dallas actually supported pretty well at 47. New York, Long Island, basically the same team. They just changed the name. I probably should have combined them. 3,800 for LA. Let's go back down again to the bottom. Equally important is who doesn't show up. Florida, Chicago, Atlanta, Philly at the bottom of the list here too. Those are the cities I kind of look at and I say, that's interesting. All right, that's enough of MLL talk. That information is all here. Next, let's go to PLL. Of course, this is going to be we are zooming in, my bad. This is going to be very important data to see is where has the PLL gone. So, just a quick understanding of the way I've done this. If they visited once, they're yellow. Twice, they're yellow. Once or two visits, that's a yellow color. If they visited 3 to 5 times, that's green. You may look at me and be like, what's wrong with you? They never visited any locations 5 times. Right. The 2020 season had planned destinations, so we did get to see what they planned to do before they went into the PLL bubble for that COVID year. So this is what they intended to do, including 2023 schedule. So really, to me, the ones that you need to pay attention to are the green ones. Salt Lake City, Denver, Dallas, Atlanta, Minneapolis, DC, Baltimore, Philly, Long Island, Albany, and Boston. I think those are the ones that have a really telling sign of the PLL likes to go here. Maybe this is going to be one of those final destinations. So if I go and I add everything back onto the map, you can kind of see where some of the hot spots come up. So I broke those down into 12 regions. To me, these are the 12 most likely locations. I will say, before I jump into these locations, the city of Philadelphia, the state of Pennsylvania, while I love you so much, I think the PLL loves what they're doing by having a championship game located in Pittsburgh. By having a championship game there, I think they want to try to keep that a neutral site. Based upon my analysis, I'm taking Philly off the board as a potential destination for a team. I hate doing that because I think it makes a ton of sense to put a team there. I think they like the neutral location. I think they like that Subaru Park field. I think they're going to keep coming back for championships, but not post a team in Pennsylvania, which is brutal because if you know me, I've been posting a lot about Penn's Woods on Twitter. That'd be awesome to see the Redwoods come into Pennsylvania, but I don't see it happening. I think they're going to keep it as a neutral location. So let's add in the regions. Starting in the West, I think it makes sense to take a look at a Pacific Northwest region combining Washington and Oregon. California, there's a lot of stops that have happened in California. I think that's a absolute potential location. Rocky Mountains, while I think Rocky Mountains, I think you're probably talking more so Denver for the first team there. Probably not the full Rocky Mountains, but I see they love the Rocky Mountains with Colorado and Utah. Texas, there's been a lot of opportunities to grow the game in Texas. It is growing. There's a ton of lacrosse players down there. Lone Star State, if you're here, comment down below. Minnesota, you guys show up. Regardless of anything else, the PLL loves coming to see you, and you show up and support the games. Minnesota, you're in a real good place. Great Lakes, I'm kind of big Great Lakes here, including Chicago, Ohio, Indiana, Indianapolis, Michigan. These are great opportunities. Indianapolis, that's a city. My bad. Whatever. You know what I'm saying. These are a great conglomerate of cities where there are a lot of lacrosse players. it makes sense to pay attention here. Jumping down to the bottom, Florida is an interesting story. You'll see why here in a minute. Florida's worthy of consideration. I'll put it that way, especially because you can kind of split Georgia in half. Maybe some go down there, maybe some go at our next region, which is the Carolinas. North Carolina, South Carolina, I think you can have some Virginia pull down if you are in the northern part of North Carolina. But really, ultimately, Charlotte's about a 4-hour drive from Atlanta. If the traffic isn't nasty. It's about a 4-hour drive from Atlanta, so you basically could have a Carolina team and still draw potentially some of the Atlanta crew for a game weekend. Let's zoom in here so you can kind of see the Northeast a little bit more. I broke the Northeast up into these 4 different regions. I think upstate makes a lot of sense. Shout out to Hutton-Jackson. The little hint on what's coming next week. I'm not talking about exact team locations, but I'm just talking about potential markets to put people in. I like his suggestion there. I think upstate New York maybe makes a lot of sense. I've got Albany in the bubble, but really it's just all upstate New York have one team. I think Maryland, that DC, Baltimore area makes sense to take a look at. Let's just call it Chesapeake. New York Metro, I'll call it New York Metro, New York City, Northern New Jersey, that kind of area I think makes sense as another region. And then of course, Boston itself. So, these are the 12 regions I think make the most sense. So what do we want to do? I've got 4 locks. I've got 4 pretty good ideas. I've got the first 2 teams out, and then I've got kind of the last 2 that aren't going to be on this list. Maybe what we should do first is jump over to the other data, the other key pieces. This is the targets of where I saw leagues before, PLL, MLL, NLL, and their attendance numbers. Unfortunately, the PLL, we didn't have their attendance numbers past the first season. Now I think we look at kind of 3 other key attributes. That is financials. So most importantly, this league has to make money, right? So we need places that are going to be able to sustain that kind of league. If they're going to be in that area, they're going to pay for stuff. They're going to come out and show up. We need to pay attention to lacrosse players, how many lacrosse players are just generally in that territory. And then lastly, we want to pay attention to what are some of the most sports obsessed fan bases in each state. So first, let's start by talking about the boys lacrosse. Where are they at? So basically, I went to Lax numbers. I actually tried to pull this from US Lacrosse. It was not easy to pull. Lax numbers looking very similar to Lax Power. Shout out to old Lax Power and you old heads. If you remember Lax Power, comment Lax Power down below. Here's basically a list of all the schools in all the different states. So I pulled that data in to my magical spreadsheet. Let's go to that tab, where you can see kind of where are some of the most lacrosse players in existence in each state. This is actually teams, so you can extrapolate that out. How many people are on a team? I don't know. Again, I don't have youth data. That would make more sense because I think the PLL is targeting youth, but this at least gives you an idea of how many lacrosse players are in a given state. And then again, I tried to match them up with some of what the team locations I thought. Interesting? Tennessee, 51 teams. I'm not familiar with the Tennessee lacrosse scene, but that's a very interesting thing to pay attention to. Next, I want to talk about money. Let's talk about disposable personal income per capita. What did I just say? Basically, after taxes, how much money do people have? In theory, it's a bit of a way of saying, okay, after they spend money on things they have to, how much money is left over? If you take a look at this map, and per capita breaks it down per person in that state. So kind of try to compare all states equally. If you take a look at this list, we see our northeastern corridor. There appears to be a decent amount of money to go ahead and spend frivolously, or most importantly, on the PLL. You take a look at Minnesota, strong financial vibes there. Denver, okay, they're going to be able to support a team. I think we can start calling that a lock at this point. Pacific Northwest, Washington's looking good. Oregon, not too shabby. Not too bad in the Pacific Northwest. California, definitely looking like they could support a team from a financial perspective. This is where things get interesting. Texas is not as strong as I really would have expected at this time. Interesting to note. Florida's about the same. They're about the same number between Florida and Texas. Carolinas, not looking as strong there either. But if we bring all that information in, I've got it all ranked and stacked. I'm going to share this spreadsheet with you so you can take a look at the data, come up with your own numbers. Again, I'm not saying this is exclusive as to why a team would go to a certain location. I'm just saying this is about the viability of having a PLL team in that given area. And last but not least, let's talk about just the most sports-obsessed states in the U.S. Here's a fantastic chart put together by Prime Putt. Level Sports, apparently, analysis took a look at this. This is just awesome. The black is better, lower numbers are better because it's actually your ranking in this scenario. Minnesota coming on strong again. I think we're probably considering them a lock at this point. Minnesota's looking good. Colorado not as good. Pacific Northwest. What happened, my friends? What happened here? California, if there's 50 states, number 34 is not the best. Texas, holy cow, Texas. Why are we not in love with our teams? That makes me a little concerned taking a look at this. Georgia, Florida, again, not so great, but then the Carolinas, here's where they're coming in strong. Carolina's in that top 50 of really enjoying sports in their state. I got to give them some love. The Great Lakes region also kind of in that similar vein to where the Carolinas are. And then, of course, the Northeast, Maryland, strong, loves it. Delaware, strong, loves it. Jersey. New York's interesting. There's just a lot to New York. I think it's kind of hard to say if they're obsessed or not, or sports obsessed. Connecticut, Massachusetts, definitely great areas to go if you want to grow the game. Speaking of grow the game, you may see I have this highlighted already down here at the bottom. What is going on in Wisconsin? Get me some cheese, my friends, because I love you all in Wisconsin. I visited once, very pretty state. I really enjoyed it. I was at University of Wisconsin. But to me, this looks like we need to Badger Nation. We need to Badger Nation to get a lacrosse team. Wisconsin, where you at? Your favorite sport is lacrosse? Let's go. Let's add that to a D1 program. As you may expect, Maryland also was a fan favorite for lacrosse. That's their favorite sport. None of the other states actually had lacrosse, but I was shocked to see Wisconsin. Frankly, I love to see it. This information was also pulled into my spreadsheet so I could try to figure out where is the PLL going to go. So these three pieces of information, the sports obsessed fans, the disposable income, and the location of high school players, helped me build what I'm going to call PLLVIS. You know what I'm saying? PLLVIS, I think, is kind of my quick lax factor of how viable the PLL viability in that state. PLLVIS, okay? Viability of having a team. Taking a look at those 12 regions that we talked about, I tried to create a nice little weighted scale, which came up with my PLLVIS numbers. Chesapeake, 10.4. I think this is a no-brainer. I also think they're an absolute lock. Great Lakes coming on strong based upon the number of players in the state, disposable income, and slightly obsessed with sports in their area. New York, good. Carolina, you are top 4. This is where things get interesting. Carolina, keep an eye on you. Boston's good. California's good. Again, go down to the bottom. Texas, that's not great, man. That's not great. Minnesota and Denver, I know they both show up on the bottom of this list, but if we're being completely honest, they're already a lock. They love lacrosse. They support lacrosse. The PLL seems to love them. I think they're already a lock. Pacific Northwest, you're kind of on the bottom here. Florida, you're kind of on the bottom here. This is where we get back to what I'm going to call just kind of the final rankings. You saw the data, you saw the information. Now we're going to get back to where I think we truly are going to go. The 8 city, state, or region in which are going to receive a PLL team in 2024. Don't hate me for this. This is just what I'm seeing. This is based upon the data. Not one thing in particular, but all things trying to combine them. So let's bring you back to the map. Taking a look at this list, let's start with my locks. So what I do believe is I think we are going to have a lock. Let's change this so they're not all the same. Let's change them to their individual styles. I think the lock states are going to be Denver. You show up. Why not? Denver's a lock. Minneapolis, I think, is going to be a lock. I should say Minnesota. You can call it Minneapolis. You can call it Minnesota, especially with Wisconsin. Their favorite sport is lacrosse. Let's go. They're next door neighbors. They can drive over. I think you're going to get a lock over here at the Chesapeake area, the Chesapeake Bay. Hint, hint, there might be a team coming back that used to exist. Chesapeake. We'll talk about teams next week. I also believe Boston is a lock. So those to me are the 4 lock teams. Denver, Minnesota, Boston, and Chesapeake. Those are your 4 locks. Your bottom 2 out immediately, I think, is probably going to be Florida and Pacific Northwest. I know we want to grow the game. I know they've visited there multiple times, but I just don't see it happening right now. The numbers to me just don't go that well. They don't support teams the best when they're in those locations, from what I can tell. And just the economic viability, the PLLVIS doesn't necessarily suggest that these are the best places to go at this time. So that leaves our 4. I think these are probably going to be the locations, and you already see them green on the chart. Let's start over here. I think this is kind of your Eastern Conference, if you will. I think you're going to get an upstate New York team, and I think you're going to get like a New York Metro. Call them New York, whatever you want to call them. New Jersey Giants and New Jersey Jets are called the New York Jets and the New York Giants, but they play in Jersey. You know what I'm saying. Sorry, Connecticut. I think you've got a lot of a case to do this, but I think you're surrounded by too many hotbeds. You can still drive to Boston, or you can drive to that New York. You may hate me for that, but I think that's what makes the most sense. I'm calling this kind of my Eastern Conference, if you will. Upstate's getting a team, really supporting the Buffalo, Rochester area. I could see that also allowing some of our Canadian friends to drive across the border to come to some games. Boston, of course, it's going to be the Boston team. You know, Paul Rabel loves Boston. It's almost like a love child of his, how much he just loves Boston, but yet he was drafted by the Cannons, so they're also his dad. So he's kind of like his own grandpa to a certain extent. Boston, I think, is absolutely going to be in here. New York, and then that Chesapeake, that's going to make up that team. So then I think this is where you start focusing on growing the game. Already talked about Denver's a lock. Minnesota's a lock. I think Carolina gets the nod. We'll get to them back in a second, but I think California first. I think California is the number 7 team, if you will, based on my rankings. California just makes sense because you need a team out west. I don't think the Pacific Northwest really works yet. California is absolutely a good place to go. There's a lot of lacrosse being played out there. There's a lot of lacrosse players that are playing out there. If you actually just look at the pure numbers, California is the number 2 state for teams. Yes, it's a large state, but that's basically where there's a lot of people playing lacrosse. I think it makes sense. And headquarters of the PLL is in California. Let's have a team there. Coming back to this was the hard choice. Do you go Carolina or do you go with the Great Lakes? For me, I had to go with Carolina, and it's just a few things. The support they seem to get, the crowds that seem to show up in those vicinities are absolutely fantastic. I know, Great Lakes, you're going to say the same thing. Your numbers between support of the MLL teams when they were there is actually very similar between the Ohio as well as the Charlotte team. They actually are very similar as far as attendance-wise. There's just something about the Carolina area. You also can pull from Atlanta. If we go back to this list, you can pull from Atlanta where they've been multiple times. They can come up here. They've been to Chicago once. They've been to Louisville, of course, once. They've been to Columbus twice. In the Carolinas, they've been to Charlotte twice. They've been to Cary or Raleigh area one time. But I think that Atlanta area coming in at 3 times makes more sense to go there. I also, if I take a look at just some of the other metrics, it just makes sense to me that you go to Carolinas. And if you watch Paul Rabel's last video about the Carolinas, he was very complimentary of Carolina, and I think that goes a long way when the president of the company is very complimentary of a given location. So there you go. There's my 8 different regions that are going to have, or city-state regions that are going to have teams. Just to recap real quick: California, Denver, Minnesota, Carolinas, Upstate, Boston, New York, and the Chesapeake. Based upon the data, that's what I've found. I will put links below to all of the resources I use. Shout out to all of them. Point Streak was absolutely phenomenal, helping me find attendance. PLL has done some interesting things and given us a little bit of data. A lot of stuff I pulled from Wikipedia. Thanks for people putting on Wikipedia. Prime Putt, their data. Bureau of Economics and Analysis. Come on, tax dollars. Thank you for going to work for me. Of course, we use Lax numbers. All of this information I will post in the description below. Let me know if you agree with me or disagree with me, and stay tuned to next week because we will talk about what teams I think are actually going to go to these locations. Remember, this is just the 8. And also remember, the PLL said it's not a guarantee that the teams today are going to be the teams next year. They could pull some of the brands from the MLL, and I think they're going to. Thanks for joining us this week. Enjoy the PLL this weekend, and I can't wait to talk to you next week about what's going to happen with each one of these locations.